Computer. Okay, there we go. No, I just got back yesterday, late last night from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and so there wasn't a lot I could do. The place that we were at had no Wi-Fi, so every morning I'd run out to the shopping center to a Starbucks, spend a couple hours studying and grading papers and things like that. And then I'd have to hop in the car and go back to where I was. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was very inconvenient, but at the same time, it was a good time. It was some R&R, and we may end up moving back there
Oh, yeah. You're from there, right?
from Lancaster. Yeah,
Yeah.
so we'll see what happens. We're gonna have to make a decision probably in the next either couple of weeks, or I mean, there's something that's available in the next 3 to 6 months, and we said
Wow.
that's a little bit early. We were thinking of a year or 2 years.
Hmm.
So, and that may be gone right now too. So we don't know. We have to call
Okay.
back in the next day or so and find out what's available. I've heard,
Wow, that would be big.
yeah, it would be like the last move, and it's a facility for a lot of guys from Dallas Seminary are there.
That would be awesome.
A lot of pastors, missionaries,
Hmm.
and others. My folks had been there, and we've been on a waiting list for 30 years. And so
Wow.
we go back like once a year, and they had two apartments that you could stay in. And when we first went back, there was only $35 a night. That was fantastic because in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, because it's a tourist area, uh, rooms can be anywhere from $150 to $300 a night.
Hmm.
So that was great, but now it's up to $70 a night. So it's a little more
It's still not bad.
not bad at all. So we looked at this one place that's will be available in the next 3 to 6 months, and we'll see what happens. My sisters are back there. They keep saying, "When are you
Mhm.
coming back?" And of course, I can be on the East Coast and do what I'm doing now.
Yeah, right.
That's the nice thing, being able to do it online.
Right.
And
My, da- my dad's a professor at UNL, and I keep trying to talk him. He's now transitioned to only teaching online classes as well through the MBA program. They have a really impressive MBA online program, and trying to talk him into coming out here.
yeah,
Yeah.
so you are up in the Boulder area, right?
Yeah, it's right outside Boulder. It's called Lafayette.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. It's a really nice area.
Yes, it is. And we were in Centennial for probably
Mhm.
10 years, and then back in 2000, well, when I retired from being pastor, we
Mhm.
moved here to Parker. And so we've been here 7 years now.
Okay. Do you have grandkids here? What's keeping you here?
What brought us here?
Yeah, what's keeping you here? Do you have
Oh,
grandkids?
well, I actually have my son here. At one time,
Okay.
both sons were here. And my younger son is a pastor up in Strasburg, but he lives here in Parker. And
Okay.
is also a writer. Um, if you look online on Amazon.com, if you type in Steve Yon, you'll see 4 of his books. He wrote for Jason Elam, the kicker for the Broncos. I don't know if you remember Jason Elam. He was the kicker for about 15 years for the Denver Broncos. And we sort of adopted him as our third son.
Mm.
And so Jason would come up with these great ideas. It's on football, terrorism, and Christianity. So they're thrillers. They're great page turners. So he did 4 of those, and then he wrote. He was a ghostwriter for 2 other books. He just finished one, And that's with that Amir Sarfati. I don't know if I told you about him. He was our Israeli guide over in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And he is a major in the IDF over there, Israel Defense Force, and is a strong believer and travels around the world preaching on prophecy. And
Wow.
so it's God's plan for Israel through the eyes of an Israeli.
Wow.
And their book is entitled The Last Hour. And he does a lot of preaching from Ezekiel and things. So they finished that. That will be out, I think, sometime next year. Chosen Books is going to publish it. And he just signed a contract for a follow-up book. And they want to focus on the tribulation period on that second book.
Mm-hmm.
So he becomes a ghostwriter. His name doesn't go on the book, but he still gets paid for ghostwriting.
Right. I have a friend who does that as well, and she writes for Daily Bread too.
Oh.
Gets to put her name on it, but she does do ghostwriting too. And she's not even she's not even allowed to tell me, and I'm one of her closest friends, what she did. It's part of her contract.
The one book he did was for two very famous Christian writers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Known for their nonfiction books, and wanted to do a fiction book and did it pretty badly. So he had to rewrite the book for him.
Oh, okay. Got it.
He enjoys writing. I told him, I said, Steve, I was a pastor who wrote books. You are a writer who pastors. And there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah. Rick, I wrote down questions that I wanted to ask you. I need to go find them, so I'm going to put you on.
Go ahead and do it. We have another 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll be right back.
We may be the only two on. I know Jen wants to come on. She has a Bible study, and she said, is it okay if I come on late? I said, sure. So
okay.
All right. Later.
Okay, I'll be right back. All right.
Okay. Bye. Mm-hmm.
Okay. This book, have you seen this visual theology?
I've seen it from Logos. I wonder what they were like. So why don't you hold them up to the camera and see what okay.
So that's just the title. I enjoyed doing the mind map so much that it really caught my eye, just because I like the graphics of it. So, like, here's an example. You're not going to be able to read it, but it's just full.
I can read it well as long as you're talking. I can keep talking and I get the full screen. So.
Oh yeah. Hello. Anyway, so he just has a bunch of visuals that aren't unlike the mind map that we did. Mm-hmm. And the foreword's written by Wayne Grudem.
Okay.
And I remember, looks like a managing editor of ESV gave recommendation on the back in terms of reviewing it. So anyway, I just picked it up off Amazon and thought I'd check it out. But it's just full of cool visuals.
Well, I was going to, in fact, I keep getting notes from them saying they're starting to give away charts. So,
Oh.
yeah, from, in fact, I just got one of those yesterday. I was on the plane. By the time I got home, I forgot all about it, and it just comes to my mind now. But yeah, I was going to. What did that run?
Let's see. Well, I got it on Amazon, so it's going to be cheaper. But the the cover says $17.99. But I'm sure I didn't pay that much because Amazon's always a little less expensive.
Well, check that out.
Yeah, I haven't read it, so I can't give you a full idea of it because I just got it. But yeah, like here's another one. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
But
My vocation, neighbors, strangers. Yep.
yeah. Anyway, yeah, we'll see.
No, I like anything that's visual like that, and I was really drawn to the concept, but I never ended up buying any of them. But I think I'll try doing that.
Hey, when you say you were offered charts, is that from this book or from Logos? Logos.
It comes through the what is it? Faith. Their Faith Life, I guess it is.
Yeah.
That's Logos.
Okay.
And so yeah, it comes out. Let me just see. Okay, I'm on the desktop. I will exit full screen and see if I can bring up. Oh. Here's the Gmail.
Yeah. Anyway, look.
Faith Life. Faith Life. New in your Faith Life group. Thank you for your order. September lecture. Okay, it's called Faith Life.
Mm-hmm.
Faith Life at faithlife.com.
Okay.
Yeah, there it is. And
is it it's the Logos company?
yeah, it's Logos's company. And their lecture hall 6 hours ago, up 80% of Reformation resources. John Wycliffe, Morning Star of the Reformation. Here's looks like a video. Luther, Beginnings of Protestant Theology, Reformed Reformation to Marriage. So if you go to faithlife.com, there's just a lot of things on there. And then they have here's Preaching Ephesians, Introduction to Biblical Greek. Here's Darrell Bach, Facebook Live with Darrell Bach. So, I mean, just, man, tons of stuff on there.
Website.
I'm amazed what is on there. Story of God's mission. DNA of the
Are you doing anything interesting for the Reformation, the 500th anniversary?
Yeah, probably. And a lot of them are introductions to their courses.
Did I lose you?
But it's a mobile app that you can just download the mobile app, Faith Life, on your phone or iPad.
There. I accidentally, yeah, I did something and I couldn't hear you. Okay, I'm back.
Okay.
Yeah, so anyway, I asked you about the Reformation.
Yeah. They on there, it showed a lot of things on the Reformation there at the faithlife.com.
Okay.
So
You had a section on Rich Mullins.
one thing that I noticed, I think it was Bob Parker, who mentioned about putting up his mind map. And,
Mark Parker. Mm-hmm.
Mark Parker. I wrote to him and I said, I think it's unfair that we are requiring you to do a mind map when no one told you how to do a mind map. Because a couple of the students basically were scratching their heads, what is a mind map? And even with the ones that we offer there, I think it would have been smart to select this is the one everybody should use so that we're working off of the same sheet of music, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was looking at the one that you used, but when I tried to open it up, something else came up, and it's something about cleaning your computer. And I got caught in that trap once before that what happens, it looks very, very inviting, and you download it, you get that in your applications, and there's a number. And what happens, something will freeze up and there's a number to call. And then when you call that number, you have a lot of problems. Mark's iPad. Okay.
Nice. So you didn't, so when you clicked on mine, it did that? Like the My Thought one did?
Yeah, yours did not come up, and I think it was out of date or something, or you can't get it anymore.
Right.
But this other thing came up. And
wow.
So anyway, I didn't bother with that. There was one I was looking at. Well, I looked at about 3 of them, and I would like to find one that either is free or is inexpensive, and then start out with section 1.
Mm-hmm.
I could do a screen capture. Here's how you do a mind map. And just do a basic mind map, and then go to section. Mark, can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, well, welcome.
Managed to dial in. Thank you. It's
glad to see you in person.
Yes.
That's fun.
I was just saying that I think that from now on, we need to provide guidance on mind maps. And perhaps like in session 1, we do some kind of a small mind map. In session 2, you build on it. So by session 5, you're an old hand at doing mind maps. We have to find one that works for everybody and is, pretty easy to use. The ones that I use, they're a little expensive, but boy, they are fantastic. They really zoom. I showed a couple of the students my mind maps that I've done in the past, and you can do so much because it basically opens up the right side of the brain, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more free flow.
Not something that I use in my field at all, and so it was very new to me, and I wasn't very proud of my results. But yeah. new modality for me to
But
use.
but see, you are so left brain. I mean, be whether you're an engineer or a scientist or what. I mean,
Yeah, a little different way of looking at the world.
yep. And this will challenge you just to let the thoughts flow and build one idea upon another idea upon another idea, and
Mm-hmm.
pretty soon it all begins to come together.
Yeah.
What's interesting, in my early ministry, I was very left brain. I mean, I was so didactic in my thinking, in my writing, in my teaching, and it wasn't until probably the last 10 years, and I've been in Denver 20 years, so it's probably the last 10 years where I heard about mind maps. Now, my wife, she used her own style of mind map, and she came up with a tree. And she'd just draw a line diagonal like that, write a key idea, and then she'd start making branches. And
Mm-hmm.
and she used to teach speed reading. And so she would help people think through, just how to create something, or how to take notes. Actually, the mayor of Fresno went to her class and got so excited. He said he's still using it, and his in the Sacramento legislative branch there. And he tells people all about this great idea, great way of thinking by using a tree. So I do my thinking primarily just through mind maps.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of sketching things out, drawing a diagram and making it a little more visual.
Yeah.
But hadn't really used a mind map, quote unquote, before.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's just a different way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
What about a flow chart? Do you like flow charts? Because it seems like you would use a flow chart.
Yeah, that's a very common way of laying out an experiment, that sort of thing. One step leads to the next. A lot of times we'll call them more like protocols.
Yeah.
You have a protocol that describes how you do things and how you move through a procedure.
Right.
But, yeah.
Well, great. Well, what questions do you have? Jennifer's going to join us a little bit later. She's in a Bible study right now. And but Daria, you said you had a list of questions.
I have a couple questions. So I was reading the your covenant review in section 5, and you're talking about the time of the fullness of the Gentiles, or when the Gentiles come in, and you were talking about Israel losing their nationality. Like that's when it or at least the slides talk about that's when it begins, and or 722 or 586. And as I was thinking it through, I mean, you can back up a little bit and explain it better than I just did, but I was also wondering where the Maccabees fit in that, because when they did their revolt, at least historically, they brought a lot of land back together. And were they not referred to as Israel? Are they not referred to at all because it's not in Scripture? Do they count?
Well, realize when they came to power, no longer did Israel was just basically in the process of, they had been dispersed, and then they came back later on, but they still were not a nation as such. I mean, they were a nation, but they did not have a kingdom. Of course, the Maccabees tried to bring that kingdom back into fruition, but that was a very short-lived kind of a situation. They dominated for a short period of time, but then they were overthrown right away. So once Israel was dispersed, they are seen and spoken about as the dispersion.
After 586?
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's when they're calling the time, that's what they're calling the time of the Gentiles?
Time of the Gentiles, yeah, would start with the Babylonian captivity, because that's what the Gentiles, starting with Babylon. This is where you go right back to the book of Daniel, and you have the four kingdoms in the book of Daniel that are prophesied one after another. Are you familiar with that?
No, it's not ringing a bell. Maybe Mark, maybe it does for you, but
Okay, no, let's turn to the book of Daniel. The last time I taught Revelation, so tonight I teach the book of Daniel. and I'm glad to teach Ezekiel too. Daniel, you have three different visions that basically are saying the same thing. So if we go to Daniel chapter 2. And it's in the second year. I happen to be using the NIV here. So in the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his mind was troubled. He could not sleep, so the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. Now when they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Well, the king was smart enough not to fall for that. And the king replied to the astrologers, this is what I firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. Now, how would you like to live in that kind of a society? And, you could tell the king anything as to what the dream meant, as long as he told you the dream. But now the king's saying, no, you tell me what I dreamt, and then give me the interpretation. Well, of course, they can't do it, and so Nebuchadnezzar sends out an edict. All the wise men, astrologers, etc., are to be put to death. Well, Daniel hears about this. Verse 14, when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact.
I love that line.
That phrase. He could have said, no, please, have mercy. No, he spoke with him with wisdom and tact. And so he asked the king's officer, what did the king issue? Why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time, so that he might interpret the dream for him. So Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. These are the other names of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. But during the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, oh, praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and deposes them. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Now imagine how surprised Nebuchadnezzar must have been when Daniel goes up and says, "This was your dream. And here's the interpretation." So Daniel tells Arioch, the commander, and he goes and comes to the king. The king asks Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he is asked about, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that pass through your mind as you lay on your bed are these. As you were lying down there, O king, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen." By the way, it's interesting today how many Muslims are coming to Christ because they see Jesus in their bedroom, or they're having visions of Jesus, and who tells them to go see so-and-so, and he will tell you what you need to hear. And so we are seeing this not only in the scriptures thousands of years ago, but also in events today. And it goes on to say, "You looked, O king, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. And while you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time. It became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth." Now, if we stop there, we would have a heyday with that interpretation, because we all come up with our own perspective of what it is. But I have good news for you. It's been interpreted. Here's the interpretation. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. You, O king, are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands, he has placed mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. Now, after you, another kingdom will rise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. And finally, there will be a fourth kingdom strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron. Hello, Jeff.
Hi.
Jump in. We are in the book of Daniel, chapter 2.
Chapter what?
Chapter 2. The last time you had the book of Revelation, now you have the book of Daniel.
I love both, so that's good.
And we're on verse 42. We're talking about a dream that Nebuchadnezzar the king has, and Daniel interprets the dream.
Okay.
Verse 42, as the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. That's the rock that is cut out and smashes all these kingdoms. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. So, Daniel chapter 2, we have a vision of a great statue of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. And he talks about 4 kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar is the first kingdom. Chapter 2, he doesn't tell you who the second, the third, or the fourth kingdom are. But don't you worry. I've got good news for you. Move to chapter 7. In chapter 7, we have another vision. Only this is a dream of Daniel. So the first is a dream of Nebuchadnezzar. He is told that his dream deals with 4 kingdoms, and Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. You are the top of the heap. In 7, we have other images, but it's dealing with the same 4 kingdoms. So chapter 7, verse 1, in the first year of Belteshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions. Visions passed through his mind as he was lying in his bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, in my vision at night, I lay, and there before me were the 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. And 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. Well, it was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, get up, eat your fill of flesh. After that, I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird, and these beasts had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. And after that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying, frightening, very powerful. It had large iron teeth, and it crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot what was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. And while I was thinking about those horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up from among them. 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. And as I looked, thrones, this is one of my favorite passages of Scripture, because I would title this, if I preached on it, Here Come the Judge. Here come the judge. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing were as white as snow, and the hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze, and a river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And the court was seated. Sit down. And the books were open. And then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. By the way, pick up from here and you go to Revelation chapter 20 and you see the actual event. Where it says, in a great white throne judgment, whosoever was not found written, whosoever's names were not found written in the book of life were thrown into the lake of fire where the beast and the false prophet already are. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. Now here's what I love. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. And he approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. And he was given authority, glory, sovereign power. All peoples and nations and men of every language worshipped him, and his dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Sounds like Revelation 19. Whenever, when I was in college, Bible college, we had a course called Daniel Rev. You can't understand Daniel without Revelation. You can't really understand Revelation without Daniel, because they have similar language. And you're going to see in Revelation a beast with 10 horns. You're going to see a time and times and half a time. And so you have very similar language. Okay, so what does all this stuff mean? I'm so glad you asked. Daniel was wondering about this himself. Verse 15, I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. And I approached one of those standing there and asked him the true meaning of all of this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. Isn't it great that the Bible often interprets itself?
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Now notice, the four great beasts are four kingdoms.
Kingdoms, yeah, okay.
So doesn't that sound like Daniel 2?
Mm-hmm.
Statue you saw, gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay are four kingdoms. You get to Daniel 7, you read about four beasts. What's this talking about? Daniel is told the four beasts are four kingdoms that will rise from the earth. But the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever, yes, forever and ever. Oh, so there's a fifth kingdom. And that fifth kingdom of Daniel 7 is the rock that comes out, that is carved out and smashes all those beasts. I mean, all those, that statue. Okay?
Okay.
Then I wanted to know the true meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from the others and most terrifying with its iron teeth and bronze claws. The beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which the three of them fell, the horn that looked more imposing than the others, that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. And the watch's horn was waging war against the saints and defeating them. You find the same thing in the book of Revelation. Until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the saints of the Most High. And the time came when they possessed the kingdom. Now he gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom. and will appear on earth. It will be different from the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this fourth kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones, and he will subdue 3 kings, and he will speak against the Most High, this is the Antichrist, and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws. And the saints, these are the tribulation saints, will be delivered over to him for a time, times, and half a time. A time is 1 times 2 and a half. It's talking about 3.5. And it's 3.5 years. When you get to Revelation, it's going to talk about 42 months, which equals what? 3.5 years. Also, it will talk about 1,260 days that this beast is ruling. 1,260 days equals 42 months, which equals 3.5 years, which equals a time, times, and half a time. Versteht? Just that, Mick. Gut, sehr sonst.
Did you just speak in German?
I just came from the Pennsylvania Dutch country where they all Bonnie Vance, you know, Pennsylvania, the Amish. They throw the cow over the fence, some hay. Throw Papa down the steps, his hat. Or if you have a big meal, you say, eat your mouth empty, Vance. And if it's raining outside, you say, oh, it's making down. It's making down heavy. Yeah. All right, let's go on. So he tells us about pardon?
I'm just confused about I understand the 10 horns, but then comes up. I'm having a hard time understanding what that was talking about.
Okay.
I know you said it, but I just didn't catch it.
Well, we didn't tell you who that fourth kingdom is yet.
Oh, I read about it already. I'm sorry.
There's going to be a confederacy of 10 nations that come from that fourth kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just keep that in mind.
Okay.
All right, so again, we only know that the first kingdom is Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. We still don't know kingdom number 2 and kingdom number 3. But don't fear, chapter 8 is here. In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision, after the one had already appeared to me. And in my vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa, in the province of Elam. And in the vision, I was beside the Ulai Canal. And I looked up, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns standing beside the canal. And the horns were long, and one of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. I watched the ram as he charged toward the west and the north and the south. What does this tell you? Where did he come from?
East.
Yeah, okay. So he comes from the east, and he's charging against the west, north, and south. No animal could stand against him. None could be rescued from his power. He did as he pleased. He became great. As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between his eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. In other words, his almost like a cartoon. You know, he just so he's not even touching the ground. He's just zipping all over the place. He came toward the 2-horned ram that I had seen standing beside the canal, and he charged at him in a great rage. I saw him attack the ram furiously, striking the ram, shattering his 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against him. The goat knocked him to the ground and trampled on him, and none could rescue the ram from his power. Now the goat became very great, but at the height of his power, his large horn was broken off, and in its place 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. So, from this goat, he does a blitzkrieg warfare over a very short period of time, takes over the world. Apparently, he dies at a young age, and 4 generals come from him. One of them, another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land, which would be Israel. It grew until it reached the host of heavens and threw some of the starry hosts down to the earth and trampled on them, and it set itself up as the great prince of the host. It took away the daily sacrifice from him, and the place of the sanctuary was brought low because of rebellion. The host of the saints and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to him, "How long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled? The vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, by which is the abomination of desolation Jesus spoke about, and the surrender of the sanctuary and of the host that will be trampled underfoot." And he said to me, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, and the sanctuary will be reconsecrated." Now, who are these animals? What do they represent? Let's go down to verse 18. While he was speaking to me, I was in deep sleep with my face to the ground. Then he touched me and raised me to my feet. He said, "I'm going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath." Keep that in mind. The time of wrath.
Okay.
The 2-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the kingdom of Greece. That's where you have the blitzkrieg warfare. And that's where when this king dies that did the blitzkrieg warfare, when he dies,
Alexander?
yep, he dies, and what happens? 4 kings come up. And 2 of them very prominent: the Seleucids in Syria, the Ptolemies in Egypt. And then you have warfare there between the Seleucids and Ptolemies. The 4th kingdom isn't mentioned, but who would be the 4th kingdom according to history? Babylon, then Persia, then Greece. Who defeated Greece?
Well,
Rome. Yeah, the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire goes off the scene, but is revised. And today, you have the Confederacy of the Nations over the former Roman Empire. And we had 10 nations, and then they expanded, and now England has pulled out of that confederacy already. But out of this Roman Empire will come 10 major nations. And out of that will come the Antichrist. So that is the book of Daniel. Daniel 2, 7, and 8. They're all talking about 4 world empires. Historically, you look at Babylon. Who took over Babylon? Persia. Who took over Persia? Greece. Who took over Greece? Rome. And Daniel names them before they ever existed. Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. And then he is told that Media Persia will be the second kingdom, and then Persia takes over the Medes, and then you have Greece, and then you have Rome. Now, you asked that question, Derry. Does that answer your question? That was a very short answer.
Yeah, Jen, so I was asking where the Maccabees fit in the Hasmonean Empire. And so it fits into the Greece section.
Yeah.
It's just interesting to me that they aren't really mentioned, or they don't, I mean, do they come up?
Remember, you have Antiochus Epiphanes. He's
Okay.
the reason you have the Maccabees is because you had Antiochus the fourth. He is called Antiochus Epiphanes. He set him up as the ruler, and he fulfilled in prophecy. You have a near view and a far view.
Mm-hmm.
And in the near view, Antiochus Epiphanes fulfilled what Daniel was speaking of. He desecrates the temple by offering a sow on the altar. And that's why the Maccabees came to power. They saw what this Seleucid was doing. And so they then rounded up the troops and overthrew that power. And so for a short period of time, they were in power, but they were not, they didn't have what they once had as a nation.
Okay.
Still under Gentile. They're not like they are today, where they have a nation, they have a government set up, and they just don't have a temple today. So that was a short-lived blip on the screen, so to speak. Not mentioned at all in the book of Daniel.
Thanks. Who has the next question?
So go ahead, Bob or Mark.
So that then brings us sort of to the question of time. So there's all sorts of interpretations of time that different people use. Your time is time and a half.
Yeah.
Some people interpret that as millennial. Paul talks about days like 1,000 years, but he took that from an earlier psalm, which also says it's like a watch in the night. And if you know anything about Roman watches, they were based on daylight length. So the time of a watch was variable over the course of a year. Where are you with interpreting time from the Bible?
Where I am is to interpret within context. And so you have time, times, and half a time in the book of Daniel. So to understand what Daniel was talking to, go to the book of Revelation, because the Bible interprets itself. And so that's...
For me.
Sorry.
No problem. So let's look at book of Revelation, because Mark, that's a great question. And so you can interpret that phrase, time, times, and half time, any way you want to, until you see that John is saying the same thing that Daniel is saying, and then he interprets what time, times, and half a time is. So let's see. I'm going to Revelation. Get back here to Daniel first. We saw that in which, was that in chapters? Yeah, that's chapter, all right. That was verse 25 in chapter 7. Now look at Revelation 11. And in Revelation 11, this is talking about the two witnesses. I was given a reed like a measuring rod and was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar and count the worshipers there. But exclude the outer court. Do not measure, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They, the Gentiles, will trample on the holy city for 42 months. And I will give power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days. So you have 42 months, which equals 1,260 days, which equals 3.5 years. And in Revelation, it also talks about time, times, and half a time. Let me get to, let's see, verse 2. It's 12:7. Okay, in 12:6 we have another event. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God where she might be taken care of for how long? 1,260 days. And then chapter 13, verse 5, the beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise his authority for how long? 42 months. So you have 1,260 days repeated twice, 42 months repeated twice, which is a time, times, and half a time, are 3.5 years. So that's why when you think in terms of the tribulation period, a tribulation of 7 years, and it says that the beast will make a covenant with Israel. This Antichrist makes a covenant with Israel for 7 years. And in the middle of that 7-year period, which is 3.5 years, or a time, times, and half a time, or 42 months, or 1,260 days, he breaks his covenant and then takes over Israel, or takes over Jerusalem, and sets himself up in the temple to be worshipped, just like Antiochus Epiphanes set up a sow. And that's what Jesus warned. He says, now look at Matthew 24. Jesus' warning in Matthew chapter 24. Because the disciples are asking in verse 3, tell us, when will this happen? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So Jesus begins with that last question first. Verses 4 through 14 is talking about what happens before the end of the age. Notice in verse 14, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come, meaning the end of the age. And then verse 15, he says, so, he just explained what happens to bring in the end of the age, which is wars and rumors of wars, nation against nation, etc. So, he says, because of what I just told you, when you see standing in the holy place, when you see standing in the temple the abomination that causes desolation spoken through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And we know in Revelation 12, that woman, it's most likely Israel, where does she flee? How long does she flee? For 1,260 days. And it's believed that she will flee, the Israel people in Israel at that time will flee to Petra.
Okay.
Now, I know this is a lot of stuff in a short period of time. But all I want to do is whet your appetite. Don't be afraid of prophecy, even though there are many views on it. Again, I get back to hermeneutics. Everything depends on your hermeneutical principles. If you're going to follow a consistent literal reading, and by literal, I'm talking about the normal plain reading, because a literal reading will accept figures of speech, illustrations, analogies, allegories, because when you read something literally and there's an allegory, you recognize it's an allegory. You recognize it's an illustration. You recognize it's a parable, but there's a reality behind the parable. The sower went out to sow a seed. Well, when Jesus doesn't just out of the blue come up with some kind of a story, he's looking at a farmer over here sowing seed as he's talking. He said, oh, now look at Josiah over here. He's out there sowing the seed. And some of what he's sowing is falling on hard ground, and some is falling on stony ground, and some's among the thorns, and then some's falling on the good ground. And so everyone's scratching their head, what are you talking about? And he says, well, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. What in the world does that mean? Well, if you really want to know, you're going to find out. And so what do the disciples do? Go to the Lord. Please explain that parable to us. Well, the seed is the word of God. And the seed that's flown and is sown on hard ground, Satan comes and devour, or the birds of the air come and take it away. And so he explains the parable. So I look at this, I take it literally unless there's a reason to see that he's talking about something more on the spiritual side. So the last time we were talking about Revelation 20, and I said 7 times it says 1,000 years, 1,000 years. Christ will reign 1,000 years. Satan's bound 1,000 years. Now you can look at it and say, well, maybe it was exactly 1,000 years. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be 1,360 days, but it's a 1,000-year period. So I take that literally because there's nothing in that passage that says now you spiritualize the 1,000 years. Well, if you spiritualize 1,000 years, then why don't you spiritualize the kingdom where Jesus is sitting and reigning? And then others are reigning with him during that period of time. And then it talks, and during that period of time, people die. And I don't think you die in heaven. So to think in terms of being in eternity, the idea that Jesus just comes back, and when he comes back, we are in eternity. When you start reading in Scripture about the lion lies down with the lamb and passages like that, and then it says, and a child of 100 years dies, that will seem very, very young, because just a child is 100 years old and he dies. Well, if that's in eternity, we have problems. Death hasn't been dealt with. So that's why I go to the Scriptures with a literal interpretation, recognizing figures of speech, analogies, and there are areas you can say that's really spiritual. But when you read about Israel, and in the Old Testament, Israel's always physical Israel, and then you read about Israel in the New Testament, and Paul says, I'm a Jewy Jew. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. I'm a Hebrew of the Hebrews. And, well, he's a physical Israelite. Yeah, he's in the church, but he is Israel. And he says, I want my people to recognize Jesus as Messiah. Ezekiel says, I got good news for you. They will do exactly that, Ezekiel 34 and 36. Because God says, I will put my spirit in them. I will put my words in their heart. So all of them will know me. Now, that's all part of that new covenant that you've been wrestling with this week.
Yep.
And we, as the church, partake in aspects of the new covenant because we have the Spirit in us already. And we have been given the new birth. And we have God's word in our hearts. And we have the Holy Spirit. And so we are beneficiaries of that. But we haven't been given the land of Israel. When you go back to the Abrahamic covenant, I will make a covenant with the nation of Israel.
So when we're referred to as the branch that's grafted in, you interpret that spiritually, but not as part of the land grant as well.
No, that's what I see, that we receive the spiritual aspects of that, but the land was so specific in Genesis, and it was specific in chapter 13 and in chapter 15, and then it's reiterated to Isaac and to Jacob. And then David and Solomon expand that. And then when you get into what is that? I'm trying to think if it's in Isaiah. In Isaiah, you have the temple, chapter 40 on. That's expanded. Forget which book it's in that expands the land and says this is what the land you will basically, you're going to have Damascus, you're going to have all that area also over to the river of Egypt, from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates. That's going to be their territory sometime in the future. And to then interpret that as the whole world, that's where you have to spiritualize it. If you're saying that we have inherited the promise to the land, because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, they that dwell therein. And once you do that, where do you stop? Where do you stop spiritualizing? And it's like you're riding a horse across a stream, and you ride the little horse, and all of a sudden here comes a spiritual horse. Oh, I'm going to hop on the spiritual horse now. Get the other side. And that's what happens. We change horses part way through when you go from the literal to the spiritual. So a consistent literal hermeneutic will help you to interpret, and that's why I like Daniel interprets for us. Ezekiel interprets for us. Revelation interprets for us. And it interprets literally 1,260 days. Well,
I have a question.
Pardon?
So you said to have a consistent hermeneutical interpretation.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of the scripture that has a spiritual interpretation? Literally. I felt like you said that a minute ago. I'm not sure if I heard you right. You said unless it has a spiritual meaning in the actual scripture.
Unless it's obviously spiritual.
So is there something a verse that you can think of that's obviously spiritual. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, no, I'm following.
Yeah, very much so. I'm just, I mean, I think of, like in the Psalms, you have a lot of language I mean, poetic language that you know they're not speaking of something literal, but there's a literal meaning behind it. The mountains roar. You have where you are giving voice, the rocks speak out. Okay.
Maybe like for 1 Corinthians 13, the way that starts out. I gotta look at it because I don't know if it's the same as what you're saying.
Well, to spiritualize, it's hard to even say you're spiritualizing because it's poetic language. The rocks cry out. Okay. Well, we know that the rocks are not literally crying out, but we know because it's poetic language, I take that literally, not that the rocks are crying out, but that the rocks are exposing, they're showing something. The heavens declare the glory of God. Well, I don't hear them. I might if I got up there. But you look up there and they are demonstrating God's glory. They are declaring. So I take that very literally. I know that what this means is they are giving audience to God's glory. They're exposing, declaring, demonstrating.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, that's a poetic language, and you do not interpret poetry the same as you would interpret prophecy or didactic information.
So I think one thing that happens with many people is when you talk about a literal hermeneutic, they mean absolutely literal, right, and are not okay with poetic language, allegory. Mm-hmm. They're expecting the heavens to verbally declare the glory of God. And when someone like myself hears the term literal interpretation, I often equate that, or had in the past equated that, with overly simplistic, right, biblical interpretation, not leaving room for allegory, not leaving room for, and I have run into some people who literally do it that way. Yeah. So, Jesus talks about man being born again. And so I say, are you born again? And they're like, yes, I am. So you literally crawled back. No. So there is some room for some poetic language and allegory and that sort of thing. And the other thing I see is that very few people understand, the language. So the Hebrew from the Old Testament or the Greek from the New Testament, and how some of it was structured, that sort of thing. But you're perfectly happy with a literal hermeneutic being something that allows for allegory and parable and poetry.
That's why when I said I hold to a literal interpretation, that's why I added I hold to a plain interpretation, like you would read any other piece of literature. Like you'd read a book, and if it has poetry in it, you'd read it that way. If you're reading and it said the rocks cry out, you would know exactly what it's talking about. It's the rocks are proclaiming this or demonstrating this or whatever it might be. That's why I like to use the term plain interpretation, normal interpretation, how you would interpret any other piece of literature. But theology doesn't give us that privilege. You spiritualize or you literalize it. It's like, no, I don't do either. But I have to use a term that hermeneutics uses, and that is a literal interpretation. If you read Ryrie, Dr. Charles Ryrie's book on dispensationalism, he makes that very clear. I had him in class. He was a personal friend of mine. I won't tell you all kinds of things about him, but we knew each other quite well. He'd come to my room to sleep because he was the president of Philadelphia College of Bible, and I'd be studying in the afternoon. I hear a knock on the door, and there's Doc, and he'd say, "Rick, I'm sleeping. I need 10 hours of sleep. I only got 9. Do you mind if I use your bed? Get me up in an hour." So, that's the kind of relationship we had. But
Wow.
in his book on dispensationalism, he makes that very, very clear. Literal means normal, like you would read any other piece of literature. You recognize allegories, you recognize figures of speech, you recognize symbols, and, but then in hermeneutics they say either you interpret it literally or you spiritualize it, and I say I don't do either. I do
So
it.
here's one for you. Moving from prophecy to other applications, how do you read Genesis 1?
Genesis 1, well, that's where you get into your Hebrew, but again, as you look at it from a scientific standpoint, you can look at it from a young age, or you can look at it from eons. The Hebrew word yom allows for either one,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's basically how, to me, it's the process of God, how God brought everything into being. Whether he did it over a long period of time or a short period of time, scientifically, I'm not qualified to answer that. And from a Hebrew's perspective, I'm not qualified, other than to know that the Hebrew word for day is used many different ways, and so you always have to go back to the context.
Yes. The other thing that I think is important, and what I often remind students who are wrestling with questions like that, is in the beginning God created, and let's base everything off that and go from there. It doesn't say how, when, what. It just says he created. Let's start with that and build from there.
I look at two things. He created, and number two, after its kind. And to me, that phrase is very important. So you have feline kind, you have canine kind, you have all these kinds, but a cat doesn't become a dog. A dog doesn't become an elephant. So to me, that's important to communicate from a biblical standpoint. That within the kind, there can be evolutionary process. Pardon?
I didn't hear this number 2 thing you said. In the kind, you said. I thought you said in the time. Sorry.
Oh.
I wasn't following.
No.
I get it.
Genesis says after its kind. K-I-N-D. You look at Genesis 1. On verse 24, and God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, wild animals, each according to its kind." So God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image and our likeness. Let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the livestock over the earth, the creatures that move along the ground. So God created man in his own image, and the image of God created he. Male and female created them. So when it comes to kinds, and that's not specifically told us, except you have living creatures kind, you have kinds that crawl along the grounds, and you have these other kinds. So within those kinds, there can be changes within the kinds, and that's not violating the interpretation, the plain literal interpretation of Genesis.
Well, that's good. I'm glad I asked.
And again, what I mentioned at another time is that the Bible is made for both right and left brain people. So we are all both, but some yield to one more than others. And I find that artists, musicians, people like this are much more right brain creators, much more right brain, and engineers and scientists are much more left brain. Doesn't mean they don't use the right part. It's just that you are trained that way, you think that way, and your DNA needs you to be that way. So what has God given us? Imagine if He only gave us a Bible in one language, and it happened to be for left brain people. What would the musicians and everybody, scratch their head? What in the world does He mean by this, and what does He mean by that? So He gives us an Old Testament written in Hebrew, which is very visual. It's the visual language. And then He gives us a New Testament in Greek, which is very didactic, very left brain. And the New Testament interprets the Old Testament. So you have all this picturesque, all this visual language in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament, it basically says, do you want to know what all that stuff meant? All those pictures, all those illustrations, let me tell you what that all means. And one of the things we had to do in Greek, in our Greek classes, is to go to one of Paul's epistles and start over on a sheet of paper, start on the left side, and begin to diagram. You go across, and then he says something, and then you're about 3 words into it, and underneath that third word is expanding on that. And then about the 4th word in there is expanding on that. And pretty soon you're way over here on the left side of the page, and you're still not. Do you realize that Ephesians chapter 1, verses 1 to 13 is one sentence? Mm-hmm. If you look at the Greek text, that's one sentence.
I've sometimes called Paul king of the run-on sentence.
That's exactly it. He never met a period that he didn't like.
Love the comma.
Yes. Comma and semicolons. Whereas the Apostle John, when he writes almost like a German theologian. He goes around in the circle and then picks up this subject and comes over here and does that, and then he picks out another subject over here, and so that's, you don't start over here with John and go like that. You just sort of, he's like little Billy in the Family Circle, or Family Circus, I guess, is that cartoon, where he's sent on an errand. Instead of going from A to B, he goes to A, C, F, H, K, G, back to A, and that's John. So trying to find, you can follow Paul's logic. Trying to find John's logic is fascinating. It's when you take your first year of Greek, usually you are in the Epistle of John, or you are in the Gospel of John, because John, in Greek, John uses very simple Greek. So
I didn't.
you learn Greek by studying the Gospel of John or 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, but to really trace his logic is difficult, because he keeps going back to things that he was saying previously. Whereas when you get to the Gospel of Luke, that's like classical Greek. So if you take Greek, the Gospel of Luke is much more difficult to understand. And John is very easy to understand.
Sort of speaks to their backgrounds too. Luke being
Yes.
a physician and an educated man, and John being fisherman.
Right, very much so.
But I happen to really enjoy John's gospel because of the different light that he presents Jesus in, a more spiritual.
Very much so. And he tells you so much more than what the other Gospels tell you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have chapter 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 in an upper room. And that's, that's really special, because you have the Holy Spirit presented in 3 chapters on the Holy Spirit in the upper room discourse. Other questions?
Speaking of literal and spiritual, I'm going to ask what is probably a dumb question, but what is Zion? I get confused about what it actually is. Is it a place? Is it heaven? Yeah.
Yep. Yes. And yes.
Okay, thanks. It's crystal clear.
What did you, in the land of Bible, what did you learn about Samaria?
It's where the Samaritans are from. No,
Israel.
there are four different ways, references. Isn't that true? Something like that.
Boy, I need to get you.
Learn more. Hey, it's
You're gonna
8:20.
have me as your instructor.
No, it actually was quite an awesome class. It's 8:20. It's not his fault.
Well, I know it's an awesome class. I know the guy who wrote it. Samaria was a town. Samaria was a region.
Right.
Samaria was a nation. Samaria was used for the northern nation of Israel at times, but it's also the home of the Samaritans in the New Testament. So it's a region, but it's also a city, the city of Samaria, founded by
I'm supposed to know this, I'm sure. Come on, Jen, Mark, help me out here.
Was it
Samaria.
founded when the northern kingdom split? Was it one of Solomon's sons, Absalom, maybe?
No.
It predates that, but it became the northern kingdom after the split.
No, it was during the Northern Kingdom. It was when it was the Northern Kingdom. One of the earlier kings, King Omri, and then his son, King Ahab. But Omri basically founded Samaria.
Okay. So that was 2 or 3 generations removed then.
Yeah, starts with Jeroboam, and then I forget all the kings in their order, but then King Omri comes up, and he really led it. I mean, Jeroboam starts out by leading Israel astray by putting a golden calf in Dan and another golden calf in Bethel, northern and southern parts of the northern kingdom. But then King Omri, he just dug deeper and deeper and deeper, and Ahab wasn't any better, and Ahab married Jezebel, and that just didn't work out. It worked out, but not for the northern kingdom.
But where does Zion come in then? I know it's in Jerusalem.
Zion started out as the city of David. City of David, Zion, my citadel. That's the Old Testament teachings.
I'm so sorry.
So at one time, Zion was a 10-acre parcel of land.
Okay.
Okay. Then Zion became the Western Hill, and then Zion became all Jerusalem, and then Zion was used as an allegory of heaven. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. Well, if you looked at Zion, you wouldn't be singing beautiful, beautiful Zion. No, but that's, I like some of these old songs. When you've been there, you go, oh man, if they only could have seen. Can't wait to cross over Jordan to see old Jordan roll. Yeah. You could basically, most places, jump over Jordan, because it's pretty narrow in most places.
So I see. So what you're saying is that it could mean any one of these 5 examples. I just need to
Always interpret within the context.
context.
And the
Right.
context,
Okay.
and I'm talking about the historical context.
Okay.
It's not only the chapter and verse context, it's the historical period in which that term is used.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's why, I mean, I love to teach interpretation, because you're interpreting geographically, you're interpreting historically, you're interpreting linguistically, you're interpreting hermeneutically. So you need to keep these facets in mind when you interpret a passage of scripture. So a word in itself is meaningless. I mean, one time you say, man, this is really cool. Are you talking about temperature? What are you talking about?
So when you're referring to Zion, if it's in Kings or Chronicles, it's more likely to be the physical location. And if it's in the New Testament, it's more likely to be an allegory for heaven or the perfect kingdom, the reestablished kingdom, that sort of thing.
Yeah. But not only that, in Kings and Chronicles, Zion would be Jerusalem, but in Samuel, it's going to be the city of David. Because that's all there was that 10 acres of land. That's what he conquered. That little appendage. So when people think, David conquered Jerusalem, they're looking at Jerusalem today and say, man, that was a huge city to conquer. No, it was 10 acres of land. So you think in terms of 10 acres, but it was a difficult 10 acres because it was up on a hill and it was almost impossible to penetrate. And the only way to really penetrate it was up through the water channel.
Okay.
So, come on, more questions. Has to be more questions. Has nothing to do with your course, obviously. But this is the last week.
I have a question about the reflection that we need to write. And if I understand it right, you want us to think about how the covenants work and then write our own covenant. If I'm understanding that right, and I'm struggling with it because God created all the covenants before, so I feel funny about, what kind of a covenant would God make with me? Yeah. So I don't know. I mean,
It's a covenant you make with God.
Yes.
It's an agreement. This is between the two of us.
Okay, so what provisions?
It would be nice to make a unconditional covenant, but usually we have conditions to our covenants. Just like uh, who was it? Isaac? No, Jacob. Lord, if you protect me, blah blah blah, I will give you 10% of all that I have. He made a covenant with God, but it was
Okay,
but it
that's
was
good example.
conditional. It was an if covenant.
And you didn't give us direction on conditional or unconditional, right?
No, it's your covenant.
All right. Get excited. Okay.
Remember, the whole purpose of this is to get you to think for yourself and to build upon the foundation of everything you've learned.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. Is this helpful? I mean, it's not helpful for the course,
Yeah.
but has this been
Yeah.
helpful?
Very helpful.
You haven't wasted your time tonight.
No.
I just wish everybody were on here. I would love to teach a class like this, where you throw out questions and I'll do the best I can to answer. And when I don't know, I let you know I don't know, or I'll look it up later on.
Yeah. I like learning like this, rather than depending on my own interpretation of what I read.
Well,
Totally.
and what we're trying to do with online education is to make it as much in-seat as we can. And that's why they provided Blackboard Collaborate. And I'm surprised you've never used Collaborate
Not me.
with any instructor, huh?
Never heard of it.
Wow. Okay, it's in your tools. You look at your tools, and it's a second or third one down, Blackboard Collaborate. It's just like Zoom,
Okay.
pretty much like Zoom. And you looking at it, Daria?
I'm looking for it
No?
under resources.
No, just go into your course. Here, let me minimize this, and I will share my
Oh,
screen.
I see the tools. Yeah.
Oh, I was in there. See if I can get back to it.
There it is, Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. Wow. I've
Yeah.
never even clicked on that tools button before. Wow.
Okay, let me share I'm going to share my screen here. See if I can share, where is it? All right, here we are. I will share this screen. You see it?
Mm-hmm.
Down here, you get down here.
Oh.
And it says Course Tools. Third one down. Blackboard Collaborate. You go on there, and it's just like what we're doing. I would create a session, and then I could send you most likely I would just send you the link. Then you can just come on just like we're doing with Zoom. It came out last year, so it's still in its infancy. But you could play around with it, create your own session, and maybe get a friend to come on with you. You just send him the link, and that's free of charge. This thing, what we're doing, costs money.
Okay.
Now, Mark, you realize that you can, let me stop. Okay, where are we here?
We're back to your video.
All right. All right, I got a bunch of stuff on here. See if I can come back here. There we go. All right, now how do I? Well, that's not helping me at all.
You should say stop sharing screen.
There we go. Yeah, that's a freebie. Get me out of here. Get out of there. I'm gonna pull you down here. There you go. Stay there. So that's very easy on Blackboard, and since it is new, not all the instructors are using it. But I find that even using that, I only get 1 or 2 people to come on. So that's why I thought I would try this one out.
Mm-hmm.
This has worked well for me. I've had good video. Only a couple times has the sound stuttered or the video stuttered. It seems like it works quite well.
Yeah, I'm surprised how good Zoom is working. I just did the 4 view. Can you see 4 views?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and I think all these pictures are very clear.
Yeah.
I should have done this to begin with. But this is what I use for my Bible study that we videotaped. And boy, I had all kinds of issues that, I mean, it would take me all day Saturday once I got the videotape. And sometimes I got the video, but I didn't get the sound. Other times I would record the sound on my OneNote. And so I'd have to take the audio from the OneNote and the video from the video camera. Then I had to try to lip sync. And so I'd wait until I opened my mouth real wide, and then I quickly, so I've learned to be a videographer in the process. So, okay, anything else?
I don't have anything, but
I'm
I
still
definitely
wondering
appreciate the time.
Okay. What's that?
I said I'm still waiting for the capstone mind map.
Oh, yeah, I have it right here. It's a shame you can't see it.
Mark didn't get to see your mind maps last time.
Yeah, Mark, the last time I think I accidentally put on the capstone or something, quickly took it off, or
No, you didn't.
oh, I didn't put it on. Yeah,
You
right.
asked us if we
I
wanted to
send
see
it all out.
it.
Oh, I see.
But that's how I created all my courses. That's actually how when I was a dean, no one told me what to do as a dean, so I made it up as I went along, and I used the mind map to say this is where I'm headed, and this is what I plan on doing. And
The covenants one was neat too. The mind map you made of the covenants.
oh, okay.
That really helped me. Except I couldn't reproduce it.
Well, again, it's having the right tools. And when you don't have the tool, it's difficult when you have to all of a sudden get a tool you've never used and then try to do an assignment that you have the information, but how do I get that with this tool?
I started out in one of the free tools that was linked, and then was frustrated with my inability to make it do what I want. So I actually exported a PDF, converted the PDF into a bitmap image, dropped that into Photoshop, and then added a few things to there. And it got to be a lot. And it still wasn't what I thought I was looking for.
And Mark, I personally apologize to you for having you go through all that.
Oh no, it's not your fault.
No, but I could have done something that would have helped you along, and I will be contacting the powers that be to make changes there, and I might do some screen captures on how to do that.
I think in the end, I would have been better off if I would have just started from scratch and sort of hand drawn it, to figure out what I wanted and then do it on the computer maybe. Because I was trying to get the software to do something that it wouldn't necessarily let me do, I think. But I also am not familiar with mind maps or making those sorts of diagrams. So I wasn't quite sure what I wanted as I was going either.
And you probably could have just done an outline and accomplished everything what was being asked. Now, I don't know if you would be interested in the mind map. The software I use, for me, it's well worth the money, but it's not cheap. And
Dr. Jan, you just muted yourself.
Still can't hear you.
Now he's playing with us.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
We can actually see a little red microphone come up with a line through it when you accidentally mute yourself.
He's on to you. Okay, so what was the software?
I have to behave myself. Okay, what I'm going to do is let me minimize that. I'm going to come up with my mind maps. And once I get them up, I will show you what this software can do. And it's amazing because it can go into a couple of things, into a bunch of balloons, to brainstorming, to notes. Let me get my mind map cloud here.
What was the name of your tool again?
iMind Map, all one word. iMind Map.
Okay. And just for Jen and Mark's reference, it was $100, I think, for one person. Does that sound right, Rick? Dr. Young?
I don't remember. I'm just going to look at now, let's see. Okay, I'm going to open a mind map.
Dr. Jan, unfortunately, I have to log off. I have 3 kids, and the chaos is starting to reign.
Oh.
They're all boys on top of everything else. So I need to go referee a little bit. Yeah. So I thank you very much for the time. I enjoyed it a lot, and hope to be able to do it again.
Okay, this is that mind map I was going to show you. It's on prayer. It's a book I was going to write on prayer, and this is what it looks like, but I just wanted to show you what else you can do with it. I'll just minimize this a little, because along with that, you can go into a capture thing like this, and you have a bunch of balloons, and here's conditions for effective prayer, and it shows you the various conditions, and you just get back to prayer.
Oh, wow.
So it does that, and then you can also do a brainstorm and put it in the brainstorm mode, and it comes up like this.
Wow.
Or you can actually do it like this and do a presentation. And when you do the animated presentation, let's see if it will, here we go. So export. Oh, I don't want to do that. anyway, you're able to present it just like you were going to
Yeah.
present anything. Then you could put it in the time map like that. So that's something, Mark, you would be enjoy.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So it's called iMindMap. You can go imindmap.com, and it has all those functions in it, and then you just get back to your mind map here. Okay?
Yeah. That has a lot more functionality.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot more than mine
They're
too.
just they're so easy to use. You just click and do all your designs. It's a no-brainer.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent.
Well, I'll let you all go. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a lot of fun.
Thank you very much. And it was nice seeing the other two of you as well.
I know, that was so fun. I loved it. Okay, everyone. Have a great night.
Have a good evening.
Okay. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.